2020年美国总统选举的结果到底如何了，牵动着很多人的心。如果是一直在跟着走入美国节目的朋友，可能就会明白，虽然民主党总统候选人拜登已经是自行宣布胜选，虽然目前大部分的新闻媒体的报道口径都已经是把他称为是当选总统，但是呢，在经过选举人团和国会认证之前，大选结果是还没有定论的。这个时候，无论哪一个候选人自己宣布胜选，或者是像媒体这样的机构宣布，那都是不作数的。而在选举程序或者是数票结果有争议的时候呢，基本上就是由最高法院来判定。但是大家会在想，这些选举常识，即便外国领导人不了解，美国大众有些人不了解，新闻媒体总应该知道吧？但是为什么他们在选举如此有争议的情况之下，还是迫不及待地一拥而上地认为拜登已经是当选总统了呢？媒体在美国大选中扮演了什么样的角色？他们为什么这么做？后果会怎样呢？大家好，欢迎来到走入美国，我是辛恬。下面呢，要跟大家分享胡佛研究所资深研究员汉森教授 Victor Hanson 的专访。他还把这次选举跟著名的英国作家乔治·奥威尔的反乌托邦小说《1984》联系起来了。那是为什么呢？现在不论是在思考、在等待，还是在行动，很多人都在寻找答案。汉森教授有什么样的建议呢？跟大家先要打个招呼，这次采访的中文翻译呢，会随后再加上。首先呢，我就问汉森教授，选举日之后出现的情况，他怎么看？
Our pollsters and the media have a lot to answer for because voting is the most important thing in American citizenship. Is that I think the pollsters deliberately gin up their polls to create momentum for one candidate and depression for the other. And it has the effect that when we come into these elections, people are sort of demoralized. And we have a lot of people today who believe that A, the pollsters deliberately misled the American people for a political purpose. B, the media did not give them enough information about the actual status of the race, and then on the night of election, they slanted their coverage and slanted their early calls. And then C, these big blue states, and especially the blue state cities, nobody has any confidence in their voting registrars because they have been adding ballots, or they've suddenly decided to quit counting in the middle of the night for some reason, or the numbers are giving us on turnout, like Wisconsin, at almost 90% of registered. That has never happened in American history. If you get 70% of registered voters to turn out, that's considered to be unbelievable. But 90% is preposterous.
谈到美国媒体，很多人都知道，大部分自由派媒体都有偏向立场的。但是现在发现，就像连保守派的媒体福克斯新闻，好像也是调转方向了。这是为什么呢？汉森教授经常接受他的采访，怎么看这样的一个现象
？If you looked at their election night, so-called analysts and experts, Chris Starwatt, and the people who worked in the back room, they were all, I think they were not very eager to be balanced and fair with Donald Trump. They came out and tried to explain why they called Arizona, and they made a fools of themselves. They had no logical explanation vis-a-vis Texas or Florida that they wouldn't call, which were clearly Trump victories. Anybody who turned on the television or who's lived in the United States a year and knows the history of those two states knew that Donald Trump was going to win Texas and likely Florida, and it was clear within 10 minutes of the return he had done both, but we didn't call him for hours. Meanwhile, they called Arizona because I think they wanted to suggest that this was a sure Trump state and he had lost it, and they were going to frame the narrative for the whole evening that Trump's base had abandoned him. And it worked. So if you see people today and you say, do you have any idea that Donald Trump got 3 million more votes than he did last time? Do you have any idea that he had 15% of the black vote? Or 33% of the Latino vote? Or he even outran some of the Senate, the most successful senators. He got higher percentages than those in his own party. Nobody's going to, or he kept the House, or he kept the Senate, and he picked up seats in the House. Nobody would believe you because they'd think, wow, that's not what I thought. The polls said it was a landslide, and after all, Biden is likely to be president, and they called Arizona very early. So that was the narrative. And then I think people got so angry that they're shocked, but they never called North Carolina and Georgia, but according to their own standards, there was evidence that they could have called them earlier, but they didn't. And now I think there's been a lot of changes in the voting in the sense of ballots are starting to show up, but people had not anticipated.
那媒体到底为什么这么做呢？
And I think the media has made the decision that, like pollsters or like Silicon Valley or like Wall Street, that Donald Trump is too much of an outsider, that he took on the bipartisan foreign policy establishment, that they don't like his China policy, they don't like his immigration policy, and they want him out. That's what's scary, that these people are taking a great risk. They've destroyed the whole reputation of the polling industry, and yet they willingly did it because of their hatred of Trump. And so each person sort of freelances on their own, a reporter here, an anchor there, a pollster here. But when you start getting 17 points from ABC and the Washington Post, 17 points that Donald Trump was going to lose, we were told the day before, or 2 days before, Wisconsin, and it was dead even the entire evening, and he's only down 20,000 votes. Something is wrong. Those people are not stupid. They know that that can destroy their reputations, but they're willing to have that happen rather than not waste an opportunity to help defeat Trump.
媒体这么的恨川普，到底有没有其他深层的原因呢？
There's a large minority, a minority, who believes that, as many people do, that everybody should be equal more than free. In other words, they want everybody to be equal, and they want it to be an equality result. And they're willing then to, the only way you can achieve that, because we're not born equal. Everybody's a little different, and sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's not. Some people have health problems. Some people got an inheritance. Some people are smarter. Some people are stupider. Some people are lazier. Some people are harder working. But we can't figure out all the different ingredients that make people unequal. Some people just want to live a quiet life, a very simple life. They don't really care whether, they go to Europe or not. Other people do, but we all have differences, and the left comes in and says, you got to let us have power, and that's only government power, and we know better than you, and we're going to set ourselves up as an elite, and we're going to force some people to give up something to make other people have it. And we know what that can mean. In admissions, we can say to the kid that has a perfect ACT and a perfect GPA, we can say, well, you're doing pretty well. You don't have to go to Stanford or Harvard. You can go to Fresno State. It won't hurt you because somebody else doesn't have a chance, and we want to equal it out. Or somebody can work his entire life for $50,000 and then all of a sudden open a business and be very successful and make $400,000. And then the state and local government can take 60% of his income and say, well, you're making too much. We're going to give it to this other person. And that's been true throughout history. But when people then rebel and say, no, I'm a free person, they want the state to come in and take away their guns, take away their First Amendment rights, take away their voting privileges. And it happens all through history and throughout the world. But what's different in the United States is that we were always the freest and most vigilant of nations not to let that creeping socialism take over, but now it has. and it controls Silicon Valley and Wall Street and corporate boardrooms, universities, foundations, the media, pollsters. Yet most people either are not aware of it, or that when they're aware of it, they don't particularly like it. And that's what happened. The Bolsheviks only had about 15% of the population behind them in Russia. I think during the Civil War in China, when you look at where Mao was in the 30s and at the end of World War II, most people thought that he was not going to be the head of China within 4 years. In other words, that there were so many alternatives that nobody in their right mind would vote or ally themselves with a mass murder like that. But they did. A very small minority did. And the same thing with Castro, same thing with Chavez. And then once they take power, they eliminate. And that was what was scary. The left has taken over the Democratic Party, and if they had taken power with the Senate, and they will eliminate the filibuster. That allows them to do whatever they want on a 51-vote margin. So they'll let in Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. They'll get 4 more senators with those 2 new states. They will get rid of the Electoral College. They will probably get 15 Supreme Court justices. So you can see that only 1 senator will stop that if we have a 51-49, and that's probably going to be in Georgia. And they have a lot more money. All the great fortunes in the United States today are on the left. The Zuckerberg, the Bloombergs, the Google people, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, most of the Walton family, Bill Gates. That's what's new. Most of the money was made in global communications, stocks, finance, tech. They're no longer great fortunes in railroads or agriculture or construction, not to that level. And so the very left-wing people are very, very wealthy. And this new progressive party is a party of the very, very rich and very poor, and it despises the middle class.
川普团队现在已经把这次选战转移到法律战，汉森教授怎么看？
The Constitution says that every state shall decide on its own rules, and that shall be the domain of the state legislatures. And so what's happened in some of these states, because under the excuse of COVID, we've had attorney generals and governors step in and say, we're going to allow a ballot that comes in a week, 10 days later. We're going to say that you don't have to have your signature on it. We're going to say you don't have to have the date on it. And those were executive decisions made by Democratic governors for the most part. And so what the Trump legal team is saying is the Constitution doesn't say that a particular executive can change the rules. What it says is the legislatures make the law. So they're all different. In every state, the manner in which you can vote, some have an ID requirement, some don't. Some say that all absentee or mail ballots must be postmarked before the day of election, some don't. But I think there's legal strategy is to say that there were exceptions made, especially in Pennsylvania, that overrode what the legislators had said was the law. And the second thing is they're going to have, if they're going to show massive fraud that's actionable, I think they're going to have to get the ballots and then try to correlate them, the signatures, with a name and an address. That could be a very, very lengthy process.
美国作为全球实力最强大的民主国家，现在出现了前所未有的不正常的，甚至是大规模选举舞弊的现象，让很多人，尤其是华人，非常的震惊和担忧。有些人认为这是对美国宪政体制的攻击和挑战。汉森教授怎么看呢？
Well, they've been attacking the Constitution nonstop, and they did that through the Supreme Court. They either had left-wing appointees, or they put such pressure on Earl Warren or David Souter or Harry Blackmun or John Paul Stevens that even Republican nominees, as we see with John Roberts, they just don't want to get up in the morning and see that their smeared and slandered in the papers. Nobody invites them to parties. Nobody gives them any respect. And the moment they become left-wing, their problems end. And so one of the reasons they hate Trump so much is now we have 5-3 with Roberts as a swing judge, and they can stop a lot of this. And because there's no popular support for transgendered restrooms, or there was not a lot of support for, gay marriage in the military, or abortion to the last very second of a pregnancy, or a local state and tax rate of 65% of your income, or reparations, or eliminating fracking. So they don't have popular support. They do it through the courts, and they do it through massaging elections and getting people in that don't have popular support. If Joe Biden wins, he's not going to have any popular support. The Senate will try to block what he tries to do, but he won't have any. He's not a popular person, and the agenda is not popular. If they say we're going to have reparations, what does that mean to the people of the Asian community that just arrived here, say 20 years ago? You're going to be responsible to write a check for somebody who's African American, and for what? That his great-grandfather was enslaved by somebody that you've never even met? Or in my case, when my great-grandparents fought on the Union side and they died, one of them died, and my father fought in World War II, and so why do I have to pay reparations? I don't go up to Japanese Americans and say to them, your grandfather on Okinawa killed my uncle that I'm named after. You owe me something. Nobody says, nobody goes up to a German American and says, well, your great grandfather in World War I gassed my grandfather. So this is what they want. They want it's a very strange agenda, and it makes no sense, and it has no popular support, but they have a lot of money. They made so much money in the global economy, and they feel they can be real left-wing as long as nobody takes their money away, and they won't. It's so vast. So it's something that everybody should watch. And it's been coming a long time. Whether it was sanctuary cities, or banning the First Amendment on campuses, or denying students accused of sexual harassment rights under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, it's been eroding little by little. And I think we saw that with the FBI and the CIA and the Robert Mueller special investigation. And a lot of the blame goes to the media. A lot of the blame.
在选举日的前一天，汉森教授发表了一篇文章，把这一次的选举呢跟奥威尔的小说《1984》连在了一起。这是为什么呢？
Well, George Orwell wrote a novel in 1947, and it was based on his fears of the Soviet Union. And he said that in a dystopian world, there would be a big brother and electronic monitoring elite, and they would watch everything we do, and they would Photoshop pictures, they would change the titles, they would come up with new vocabulary, and their pretense was they were going to make everybody equal, but it was really about controlling people's lives for their own particular selfish interest. That is, this clique that ran the government. And when you wake up in the morning on election day and you can say something, let's say today you tweet or you put on your Facebook page a concern, or you say there's cheating, well, they have decided that if you make that charge, then they can red flag your communications. If you continue to do it, they can deplatform you. If you go onto Google and you say you want to search voter fraud, usually the first 10 or 20 searches will come up as false charges of voter fraud. So they massage the order of Google results to get a preconceived way. And then when you add that to posters who have deliberately misrepresented what public opinion is, and then you add that to the media that highlights certain aspects of a campaign, such as, oh, Donald Trump supposedly removed mailboxes. He never did. Versus Hunter Biden scandal, which nobody covered. You couldn't cover it. If you talked about it, it would be deplatformed. And then you add that, media and pollsters, to, as I said, the electoral process that's run by very left-wing people in cities. And they feel that the voice of the people is for Joe Biden or the Democratic Party, and they're going to do everything in their means to make sure they win.
在目前的情况下，大家可以做什么？应该怎么做？汉森教授有什么样的建议呢？
I think people have to speak out, and they have to look at themselves as individual Americans and say, if you're an immigrant, you came to this country, or you were born in this country, they're going to have to say, I have one allegiance, and that's to the U.S. Constitution. And I don't really care what a politician says, whether they're going to give me this or that. I want to know, are they going to respect the rights of free speech? If I want to, can I buy a firearm to protect my family? If I'm on a campus, do I have rights of due process, habeas corpus, cross-examination? And when I go to an election, can I be confident that a person can, just as you do when you cash a check, present an ID, be given a ballot, vote? And if that politician's not for that, I don't care what party he's in, I don't care what race, gender, then I'm not going to vote for him. It's something's wrong in a country when Joe Biden says in advance, I'm going to pick a African-American woman. Nobody should be, that's crazy to say. I'm going to tell everybody in advance that if you're an Asian woman, or you're a white male, or if you're a black man, that you can't be his vice president. It makes no sense at all. And yet he had a lot of people go. People should say, we're not going to do that. But they don't. So we all have to speak out, each according to our station, I think. And if we don't speak out, the hour is approaching midnight. So everybody's got to get renewed energy and say, you know what, I don't care what you call me. I don't care if you call me a xenophobe, homophobe, racist, protectionist, xenophobe, I don't know, bigot. I don't care whatever language you use. I don't believe any of it. I'm going to speak my mind, and it has no effect on me. And when Americans get to that point where somebody can say, you can call me any name you want and it has no effect, and you're not going to change that name of that street. That street's been here for 100 years. We're not going to tear down Junipero Serra's statue. He was a good man. I'm not going to let you do it. That means that we'll get our country back. But until we do that, and as long as we act like sheep, we get what we deserve.
汉森教授可以说是美国的学者中非常少数的能够看清楚美国已经被左派社会主义、共产主义思潮所侵蚀的危险的这样的一个人。那如果您同意他的看法的话，请广泛流传这期节目，并请在下面点赞、订阅我的频道。感谢您的收看，我们下次节目再见。